Hello everybody and welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. My name is Deborah Hatswell and you're listening to BBR Investigations. This month I received a number of new reports from people in the UK who've experienced something they can't name or describe as they've been travelling on the roads and the country lanes. In each case, the witness gives a good description of the thing they saw, but most struggle to name it. So for that purpose, I'll only use the witness's description of the creature, the being or the entity as they experienced it. During one of our recent Saturday live feeds on YouTube, my co-host and guest Deborah Singleton shared her experiences in and around the small town of Rodley. Deborah is not only a witness and an experiencer of the paranormal, she's also collected many reports told to her by local people from the area. Like most folk, Deb was just driving home after a night out with her husband when they went to visit friends for the evening. As Deborah drove, her husband slept in the passenger seat beside her. She was filled with a sudden feeling of dread that came from nowhere, and she saw a tall, dark figure standing at the side of the road, and it stepped out into the road. Deb avoided its gaze at all costs, as she felt she would not make it home that night if she made eye contact with the horrible creature. In a second experience, several years later, in August of 2021, Deb came out to meet me in Yorkshire, and we had a really good visit. And it was on the way home, things took a bizarre turn when Deborah saw a horrible sight on the side of the road. This time, she had a friend in the car with her, who also saw the figure, but it appeared differently to each lady. Deb saw a young girl who presented herself in a white flowery playsuit. Her skin was white like alabaster. And when Deb looked at her face, or what should have been her face, she saw no features, nothing but her mouth, which was stretched out, black and void in her face. Carol, who was in the passenger seat, saw what she described as a figure and some sort of white flash, a dark cud. There was just an empty darkness where the face should have been. Although it does make sense to me why we both saw things differently. I saw the energy of the thing, the darkness. Deborah saw what it wants everyone to see, what it projects. Does that make sense? Well, it makes perfect sense to me. I often take reports from people who are out driving our lanes and motorways when they see something impossible standing at the side of the road, or in some cases, walking out into the road. A number of drivers have reported that they felt they had hit someone with their car, to the point they'd got out of the vehicle to look, only to find the road empty. And I think, to be honest, that's a blessing, because we don't know what happens to those who leave the car and are confronted by someone or something not of this world. You'd be amazed just how many times this happens, how many reports like this come in. In fact, I was contacted in early March by a lady who herself was within just a few miles of both of Deborah's experiences. This is also an area with reports of werewolf-like creatures, paranormal, otherworldly events, lots of UFO reports. In fact, it's a short step to the moors. We all know from the film The American Werewolf in London. Our witness was travelling home from work late at night with a friend in a car when they both saw something that terrified them. And this happened in Yorkshire in 2020. The witness's name is Philippa Featherstone, and she said, I message you via Instagram and I'm just sending my story of what happened and hoping you may be able to shed some light on it. It happened around 3-4 years ago. I live in West Yorkshire in a town called Guiseley, and I was visiting another town about 40 minutes away called Harrogate. This town in particular has a lot of history and paranormal goings on, which I've never really experienced. But this particular night, I was with my friend and we were working late in one of the local bars. It was my turn to be the designated driver that night. Neither of us had any alcohol. We were both sober. It was a pre-4 in the morning and I had to drive my friend home before I made my way back to my house. Now, to get out of Harrogate and head back towards the other towns, you have to go down some country lanes, pretty much in the middle of nowhere. It's pitch black down there. There's no lighting apart from the moonlight and my crappy headlights. I'm a cautious driver, so I don't drive very fast either. So I'm driving down the lanes and it all feels a bit creepy, as it always is out there driving at night. I first noticed my headlights pick up what I thought was a person further down the road. So my first thought was, where's this person's car? So thinking the car was just around the bend, I kind of swerved out to make room to go around it. But as I got closer, I noticed there was no car there. It was a freezing cold night, and I thought, why is this person out here at this time in this freezing cold weather? Then I watched as they crossed the road in what looked like a jogging motion. But they weren't jogging. It was more of a slow motion creep. Whoever or whatever this was, it was standing on two legs and it was completely white. I never saw its face. I just saw it from the side. It looked as if it didn't even acknowledge us at all. As I got even closer, I noticed it was hunched over, as if it was a really old, weathered man. But it wasn't a person. It was something I can't explain. It's like my whole being knew it wasn't human. It almost felt like that uncanny valley feeling. This thing went into the bushes on the other side of the road and completely disappeared. My friend saw it too, so I know I didn't imagine it or mistake it for something else. I didn't stop as I was terrified. In fact, the fear I felt was like nothing I'd felt before. I didn't even go home that night. I stayed at my friend's house until morning because I didn't want to drive home alone. I've mentioned it to a few people over the last few years, but they've brushed it off like it was my imagination, or it was just an ordinary person out walking on the road. But I knew it wasn't. It wasn't as simple as that. It also wasn't an animal, as it was on two legs, and it was moving with clear, visible arm movements. People kept saying maybe I was having a migraine, but it doesn't explain how my friend saw it as well. I haven't thought about it for a while, but recently it's popped back up, and I feel like I need to get my story out there. There's something wrong out there, something that can't be explained, and I've seen it with my own eyes. I haven't been down that road at night since. I also can't find anything that explains or even validates what happened. Maybe I'm the first to see it in this part of Yorkshire, maybe the last, I don't know. Or maybe other people have seen it and they just aren't saying anything. But it's made me believe in things other than just the reality of what we know. Thank you, Philippa. Philippa saw her horror during the time the whole country was on lockdown. The reports of cryptid creatures, paranormal and supernatural experiences came in at a more frequent rate, due partly, I believe, to the lack of humans out there on the roads. We were only allowed to do necessary journeys, like driving to and from work to attend medical appointments. Those reports came in from all across the UK. Touching base with my colleagues in the US and Canada made me aware it was following a similar pattern. In fact, since 2017, reports of all kinds of phenomena have been on the increase, and that has continued to date. My most recent report that would fit into this category came in from the aptly named Skin Flats area of Falkirk, when a man who was driving shortly after midnight on the 12th of March 24 saw a female run out from the dark fields and head straight in front of his car. I spoke with him shortly after the event, as I'd worked a case with him previously when he'd been out at a similar time of night and experienced an event he was still coming to terms with from several years ago. We speak from time to time, so he reached out to me and we chatted about what happened. And I believed that while he's out driving the roads at night, thinking things over, is the time he experiences activity. I'll go into that a little bit more later. But first, let me share his experience with you. Hi, Deb. Thanks for getting back to me. I've just had a really strange experience. I pulled the car over to get myself together as it really shook me up. I was out at a place called Skin Flats in Falkirk, just driving. I couldn't settle myself to sleep for the last few nights, so I thought I'd just go for a drive, clear my head. I used to come out here with my mate, we'd always be out looking for rabbits. Everything was fine until something ran out of the darkness and ran straight into the road as I was driving. I really thought I'd hit someone. It looked like a woman. I was driving about 20, maybe 25 mile an hour, and there was no one else out there. The roads are derelict after 10 p.m, so that's not, unusual for us. There's a little junction you can take to, close to the Dutch Inn, and I took the right-hand road when it happened. I could tell it was a woman because I remember seeing long hair. She wasn't dressed in a long dress or anything that stood out to me. She just had ordinary clothes on, and in the politest way possible, she was clearly female. I just thought I'd hit her. I stopped the car and got out to look, and she was nowhere to be seen. It really shook me up, Deb. I had a panic attack. I had to pull over into the lay-by and collect my thoughts. I'm not familiar with the area, so I asked our witness if he knew of any accidents at the spot, and he explained that he didn't, but the road's very close to the river, and people have come to the end of their lives down there over the years. Now, this could be a connection or something we can look into, but I feel this experience was one where our witness was in a relaxed state. He was driving, thinking about old memories, in a place he knew well and had visited so many times. Our brains are on automatic pilot when we're driving or doing an activity that relaxes us. It's no different to sitting down and meditating or automatic writing. Scrying, all manner of connections can happen when you tune in. We use our peripheral brain at this point, and I find the connection to this and the fact that most of these creatures, spirits, or entity enter our vision from our peripheral side. All of the experiences would not have taken place if the road spookers just stayed hidden until the car passed by. I don't believe these experiences were incidental. In the next case, I believe the creature seen by the two sisters was scared out of the woods when the man with a large pack of dogs entered on his evening walk. Our next report comes from the Swannington area of the UK, and it's from Emma Adam, who was in a car driving with her sister. And she said, I want to report something that happened to me and my sister a few years ago now, in 2013. We still don't know to this day what the figure was that we saw. I don't have a name for it, and nothing on Google's matching with it. Someone said it could be a red deer as they'll stand on 2 feet, but this was no deer. That night we were driving along Limby Hall Lane in Swannington, it's in Leicestershire. The lane is just past the Greystoke Priory area, and we decided on this route as it was new for us. We wanted to walk the dogs somewhere different for a change. We were out on the lane and it was getting dark, but there was still light, enough to walk the dogs. I would say it was probably around about 10, 11 p.m. time. My sister was the driver and I was the passenger, and our dogs were in the back. As we went down the lane, a man came out from the fields and he had 3 dogs on leads, and he crossed the road into the woods to the side of us. We thought nothing of it. We stopped the car to let him pass as it was a single road, and you can't turn your car around until you reach the pull-ins. After the man passed, we went a few pull-ins along the road, but still it was not wide enough to turn the car. So we decided to just keep going until we could turn around safely and head back. We carried along Limby Hall Lane for some time, and then in the distance, and in the light from the car's headlight, we could see something was standing across the road, and it was walking really strangely. It was very tall, I'd say about 7 or 8 feet tall, and it looked injured or sickly as it walked across the road slowly with a limp and an arched back. It was very wide and all black, and as the headlights didn't reach it properly, we couldn't get a really good look at the face. I said to my sister, Stop the car, what the fuck's that? And she said, I've no idea. She pressed her on, and to our horror, this thing stopped in the middle of the road and turned and stared at the car. I told my sister to put the main beam on, and as she did this, we were still not close enough to light it all up. The only thing that did light up was its eyes, and it was reflecting not just 2 eyes, but many. This thing had multiple reflective eyes. It just stood there in the road for ages looking at the car, and then it walked, with what I believe to be a limp, into the woods in the field and was gone. At this point, we both bricking it, and we pressed the central lock in, and we couldn't turn the car around. We had to go towards where it had crossed the road. And as we went past the point where it went into the woods, the road was pitch black. My sister floored it. Now, I'm telling people that they don't believe you. I don't suppose it will until it happens to them. We Googled to find this creature, but we can't find anything that matches it. Now, on the 30th of August 2016, Emma said, my sister and 3 friends are going to go back to Limbiall Lane at night to investigate what I saw. While chatting with my friend, we realised that her uncle had seen the same thing as me and my sister. This time it was walking along the grass verge at night, along the road. His account is almost exactly the same as mine, in exactly the same area and exactly the same stretch of road, just opposite the Grey Stew Priory. He also saw a crouched dark figure with no face that could be seen, as the figure was so hunched over it was arching its back, and it was coming towards him, almost heading for his car. This was at the junction opposite the ruins. He turned left and sped off towards Loughborough, and now he'll never drive past the area. He avoids it all the time. Now, the Priory itself has a number of reports, and Emma did an amazing amount of background research on it. And she was even able to find out that there were a number of tunnels that went out into the town from the Priory. And she's not the only person to make a report down there. You know, the reports on the road were started long before the automobile was even, became popular transport of choice here. In a blog about the area, I found a startling number of reports that had been made over the years. In 1926, a horse pulling a cart on the road stopped and began trembling as 6 white figures were seen to drift across the road and move into the ruins of the Priory. Another elderly lady was, she contacted the Mail newspaper on the subject. She was 80-year-old and her name was Mrs. Hetty Wilson. She came from Loughborough. And she gave an account of being with her family in September 1926 when Hetty was age 11 and she and her parents were travelling home from Colville, where their father had been selling horses. Mrs. Wilson said, we were passing the ruins when the horse driving our landau stopped. Its body was quivering. When we turned to see what was wrong, we saw 6 ghosts coming out of the copse. Mrs. Wilson remembered her father shouting, good God! And that she had been so scared she hid her head. When she looked again, the ghosts had crossed the road and were heading up to the ruins. They wore white robes and had no faces or feet. A youngster playing cricket on Grey Stew Park in 1934 noticed a white figure moving along a nearby footpath. He watched this apparition with 2 of his friends as it went under a railway embankment, only to disappear before they reached the archway to look through the tunnel. One of the most fascinating reports was made in 1954, when a bus driver stopped at the bus stop opposite the ruins to let a woman dressed in white get on board. When the doors opened, there was nobody there. The conductor and the driver both got off the bus to look for the lady, but found nothing. So they head for Shepshed, pulled over on a lonely shelter opposite the ruins to pick this woman up in white, and no one was there. The door opened, but no one boarded the vehicle. So you can imagine they were in a bit of a state, But he was not the last bus driver to be caught out, as another driver slowed down to stop for a figure that vanished in 2002, so much more recently. This bus driver related this account to various people afterwards, including a Mr. David Callaghan of Eccleston, who made a written report of the story. The bus stop story is now a piece of local folklore, and it's regularly being used as the basis for newspaper, articles. In the spring of 61, the White Lady was encountered again by an off-duty village policeman who was out walking his dog in the fields about half a mile southwest of the Priory. His account runs as follows. On finishing duty just before midnight on a warm April evening, I decided to take my boxer dog for a walk along the footpath across the fields opposite my home, where now stands the Melrose Road housing estate. It was a beautiful night, almost a full moon, and not a cloud in the sky. We'd been walking in the field for about 100, 150 yards, when suddenly my dog gave a deep-throated growl. I looked around me and could see no one, or anything to upset the dog. However, he continued to growl, came and stood close to me as if protecting me. I put my hand down to stroke him, and the bristles along his back were stiff and rigid. A few seconds after this, there was a chill in the air, and a white form in the shape of a long cloak and a hood glided by and disappeared into a hawthorn hedge. When this form went out of sight, he said, my dog quietened down and the chill went out of the air. The next day I told my neighbour of this and he said, you've no doubt seen our local nun. She could have been on top of the tunnel. On delving into this further, I learned that there is a tunnel that's supposed to exist between the monastery and the priory, which is now Greystew ruins. I know my own case, it just could have been a practical joke. You know, the hedge was so thick it was impossible for any human being to walk through it. But he was not the only policeman to see something at that spot. In August of 1981, the ghost was seen by Nigel Beck of Thringston. He was a police officer and he worked for Loughborough Police. And Mr. Beck said, it was 12:30 a.m. The weather was still warm and I was riding about 50 miles an hour when I went into the left-hand turn at Greystew. Suddenly, I felt intense cold, and as I was going around the corner, this grey, shadowy figure glided across the road. This strange figure then went behind the bus shelter. Mr. Beck described the creature as having been hooded with a long gown and no feet. He said, I was absolutely petrified. I stopped near the bus shelter, but I couldn't see anything. I then resumed my journey home, looking back all the time. Mr. Beck is still a regular user of the A512 road, but states that nothing out of the ordinary has occurred since. It would probably have been during the early 1980s that Vincent Ball, another motorcyclist, claimed to have seen the ghost while travelling along the A512 en route from Loughborough, where he worked as a nurse. He mentioned his sighting to his then mother-in-law, Mrs. Emma Butterworth, stating that both he and another motorist had pulled up near the ruins when startled by an apparition seen in the road. Both Vince and the other motorist confirmed to one another that what they thought they'd seen before resuming their journey. In 1985, the ghost was seen by Mr. Danny MacDonald, who then lived in John Street, Thringston. Mr. MacDonald was travelling by car to Loughborough one evening to visit his parents when he suddenly became aware of a white figure standing by the bus stop. The figure disappeared in an instant, but Danny was so convinced that he'd experienced something out of the ordinary that he later mentioned it to his younger brother John, who shared the experience with the blog's author. And Tracy Evans of Swannington believes it would have been November or December 2000, around 11:30 in the evening, so very similar to Emma and her sister, when she had an eerie experience on that road. Tracy was travelling back from Loughborough with her then husband, Mick, and their two children, who were sitting in the back of the car. As the vehicle swept around the bend of the Priory grounds, the car suddenly became enveloped in a thick, intense fog that seemed to appear out of nowhere, about the point of the Belton turn near the bus stop. Mick instinctively slowed down and then stopped the car on seeing a figure pass in front of his vehicle, at which point the fog seemed to suddenly vanish as quickly as it had appeared. Tracy then remembers her husband saying, "Did you see that?" And Tracy confirmed that she had, and the couple were so unnerved by the experience that they decided not to mention the matter again. Tracy described the figure as being distinctly human in form and was mystified by the fact that the fog had appeared and disappeared in a matter of yards. In April 2002, the Colville Times mentioned another sighting in a feature on the Greystew restoration project. The sighting had first been reported in the Colville Times 2 years previously and told the story of 32-year-old Robert Finch, who experienced a terrifying encounter whilst travelling by car one night along the nearby Swannington Road. Mr. Finch felt compelled to stop his vehicle when he suddenly felt unnaturally hot. It was then that the engine stalled and he was left alone in an eerie silence. Although the car was cold, Mr. Finch felt like he was burning up and perceived himself sweating profusely as his heartbeat raced. He got out of the car and stood in the icy night air, only to sense that there was another presence somewhere in that mist. At once he jumped back in the car, started the engine, and remembered being momentarily startled at a moth brushed past his windscreen as he pulled off the edge of the road. He then glanced into the rearview mirror, and his stare was met by the icy an emotionless gaze, black eyes, set deep in a misty face. Now, a popular explanation for the supernatural activity is that the figure is the ghost of Rose de Verdon, the founder of Greystew Priory. She'd been laid to rest as a priory before being reinterred at nearby Belton Church. Many people believe Rose's spirit was disturbed during this process and roamed the ruins in the form of a white lady who is often reported and has no facial features or feet. While a number of the recorded supernatural encounters involve a sighting of a white lady, others involve the energy surrounding Greystew. A local medium named Tarona was driving past Greystew when she felt drawn to the ruins by an energy encompassing them. She reported a negative entity, having sensed betrayal, murder, and plague. Mr. Gough, a worker at the Greystew's estate for about 40 years, told how he had encountered the spectral form of a nun one night in the grounds of Greystew Manor. The figure was dressed entirely in white and wore a wide-brimmed hat, and the apparition disappeared as Mr. Gough attempted to take a closer look. In all of the accounts mentioned at the Priory or along the road speak of a white lady, a white mist, or a presence moving from one side of the road to the other. And then we also have the creature that's crouched over with a hunched back. Could we be dealing with energy that appears in a way to scare or terrifies you the most? For decades, people have seen and experienced it, and I have no doubt the reports from the road will continue to come in. And I reckon there's probably more people out there that have experienced something and just never reported it. There's other roads like this in the UK. There's roads like this in your town. But one that's always stayed with me was from a place I went on holiday with Mark many years ago, and that was in Pembrokeshire, in the area of the Clay Lanes. Now, a BBR witness wrote to me, got in touch with me and said, my colleague and I were working nights and driving from Milford to Haverfordwest. It was about 2 a.m. and we were just approaching Johnston. And as we did, I saw a very tall, lanky, dark figure run straight across the road into the hedge. We stopped, got out torches, etc. There was no one there, and there was nowhere it could have gone. It literally disappeared into the hedge. Then some paramedics stopped behind us and told us about the road being haunted. This figure that we saw had long arms and legs, and it ran very quickly. Pembrokeshire Beyond blog said, I have reported that I have been bombarded with a plethora of strange occurrences and experiences on one quiet stretch of a Pembrokeshire road linking Merlins Bridge with Haverfordwest. Clay Lanes is a small road that's often used to avoid the build-up of traffic that brings Haverford to a near halt. And apart from a small riverside hamlet, there's nothing there but fields, some hedges and an old ruin. It begs the question, is this Pembrokeshire's most haunted stretch of road? Now, two women were travelling to work in Haverfordwest from Milford when they had a strange experience. This time, this was outside of Staton, Milford Haven, just after 6 a.m. in the morning. Both ladies wished to remain anonymous due to their profession. They both stated that after the traffic lights and past a well-known pub in the area, they saw a tall, shadowy figure on the right-hand side of the road as you travelled to Haverfordwest. They said it is not uncommon to see people on the side of the road, as there are many workers up at that time of the day waiting for lifts, and they took no notice, other than how tall this figure was. As they continued their drive, they claimed the tall figure darted across the road at an astonishing speed and disappeared. The driver slammed on her brakes, expecting to have hit someone or something. The passenger left the car and there was no evidence of an accident or of a person or an animal on the road anywhere near the car. They continued their journey, both confused and shaken up. And when they safely arrived at their workplace, they told a senior colleague of their experience. Their colleague casually told them that it was a common occurrence and a well-known paranormal hotspot, and others had seen a strange figure at that spot. The ladies have said that since that event, they've not witnessed any further activity, but they're very mindful on their morning journey. You know, there might be something not quite right with that part of the road. And then it happened again. Mr. Taylor wrote into the blog to explain his situation when he was using clay lanes on a holiday excursion. He said, "We've visited Pembrokeshire many times over the years. It's one of my favourite destinations, and we've family in Saundersfoot with whom we stay. I'm very friendly with the area, but I'm not really familiar with Haverfordwest Castle. So my wife and my daughters enjoyed our trip over there, and we took the road, Clay Lane, that takes you there to continue our trip. It wasn't late, maybe 8 p.m. It was on that road that we travelled up a steep hill, and we were drawn onto a country road. On our right was a field, and what appeared to be a ruined church, which upon research is an old house, Harold Stone House. I was tempted to get out and grab a picture of the ruin, when my wife shouted to slow down, and in the road was the figure of a person. I stopped, and my wife and the two children watched as a blurry figure walked from the middle of the road and disappeared into a gap into the hedge. The figure was very tall, and it was definitely in front of us. There were no discernible features, just a blurry outline of a tall figure, maybe over 6 feet tall. You could see the arms swinging as it walked. There wasn't dirt on the windscreen or shadows cast by the trees or an ordinary person just crossing the road. There was an actual shadowy object, and it was crossing the road in front of us. It was very unsettling, and my children, particularly the youngest, were very upset by the sighting. I'm not one for the paranormal, but to see something like this in daylight with my family has obviously opened my mind to such things. I'm ashamed to admit that I didn't get out of the car to see where it had gone, and the incident happened so quickly I didn't even get a photograph. And then a report was made to the blog by a young man out jogging. A young man using clay lanes one night to go jogging said that while running, he thought he heard an animal running next to him in the hedge. He said that such things did not normally concern him, but as he ran, he realised this animal was not only quite large due to the noise it was making, but also it was very near to him and deliberately keeping up pace with him. The gentleman decided to sprint the last stretch and up to the comforting light of Merlins Bridge, and when he reached St. Mark's School and looked behind him, he saw peering back at him from the darkness a pair of large golden eyes. The eyes blinked and then vanished. Was this a curious creature, or had the man's jogging in the night disturbed some strange entity? Also on the same road as the shadowing creature, there are all of these numerous reports. Merlin's Bridge itself has its own reputation for strange things being seen there. On September the 14th, 2018, approximately 10 p.m, two people in a car reported witnessing a very odd anomaly, and they reported it to Pembrokeshire Paranormal. Statement 1. At 10 p.m, I and a friend were driving down Clay Lane from Merlin's Bridge. Not far from the road, we saw a bright white light, probably the size of a beach ball, about 30 feet in front of the car. It was on the left side of the road, on a right-hand bend, and it just disappeared into the hedge. There was no glare, so it wasn't a torch or illumination light or anything like that. It was just a ball of light. There was no opening in the hedge for a person to stood in either. When we got home, we checked the dashcam footage, and for some reason it hadn't recorded the event. It was far too bright not to have been picked up on camera. Now normally, so I don't understand what the problem could have been. We slowed down where we saw the light coming from, and there was nothing there at all. It was barely past St. Mark's School. We were just at the beginning of Clay Lane, really, when it gets completely dark after the houses on the Merlin Bridge side. We even turned around at the right, the little right-hand turn lane there, a little further on, to keep trying to find an explanation. But there was nothing to explain any of this. The light didn't correlate with coming from anywhere but the road. My friend and I both vape, so we had the windows open, and there was no sound whatsoever. I shut the windows, locked the doors quickly after that. The light that we saw wasn't in the sky. It was in a person's shape, a person's head height, if that makes sense. When we watched the video back, you hear me saying, "What was that?" But nothing's on the film. Then my friend said, I don't know. We were in shock seeing that, and it's hard to know if I brought it on myself from getting worked up. You know, you can see in the video that he drives slow right down at the exact point that we saw it, and there's nothing. It recorded the car and our conversation, but not the light itself. But as I mentioned, it was far too bright not to have for it to have picked it up. All I had was a really bad headache afterwards, to be honest. The second lad in the car said, I experienced a strange thing when driving with my friend close to Merlins Bridge. It was about 10:15. I put my lights on the main beam, and as we got around the first corner from Merlin's Bridge, there was a floating ball of light about the size of a football on the passenger side of the road, about 10 feet in front of us. We could see it as clear as day. We both noticed it, thinking it was a torch or something. I slowed down, and the light went sideways into the hedge. And it was a full hedge, no gaps, so it couldn't have been a person. I'm still in shock. We turned around, headed back, and did the route again, and I saw nothing. We went back to my house and looked at your website, and seeing the two reports of a white light in the exact same location, we were shaking, had me with goosebumps. I have a dash cam, and like I said, I looked at the footage, but whether it was, it's not shown up on my recordings. I don't know what this is, but being a bit sceptical, I am excited to find out. So there you have it, a very small selection of the hundreds of reports made by people driving the roads in the UK. There are so many more that I could share with you for hours, too many for me to mention tonight. But in future podcasts, I will share those reports with you. Who knows? You may be the next person who sees something while you're out driving.